No hook, no jump cut, no dramatic music sting. Just the sound of a diesel engine turning over in a Chautauqua County, New York backyard. That's how almost every Andrew Camarata video starts, and it's also, in a strange way, how his entire career started. Quietly, without anyone expecting it to become anything. Today, Andrew Camarata runs a YouTube channel with more than 1.5 million subscribers and hundreds of millions of cumulative views, built almost entirely on unscripted footage of himself operating bulldozers, excavators, and dump trucks. But the empire framing that gets thrown around online obscures a more interesting and more accurate story. A mail carrier who spent nearly a decade quietly building a property maintenance business before a camera ever came out. This is that story, pieced together from interviews, biographical reporting, and the public record of his own channel. Long before Andrew Camarata meant heavy equipment content, it meant a name on a mail route. After finishing high school and briefly attending college to study computer science, Camarata decided the tech industry desk job path wasn't for him. He took a position with the United States Postal Service instead, a job he has described in interviews as reasonably good work, decent pay, and importantly, not a schedule that consumed every waking hour. That last detail matters more than it sounds like it should. A full-time desk career would have left him no room to build anything on the side. The postal route did. According to biographical reporting, his father had also worked in a postmaster role, which shaped his initial decision to apply. This wasn't a random job pick, it was something closer to a family trade being passed sideways rather than directly. By his own account, given years later on The Proper Job podcast, Camarata started building his property maintenance business while still working at the post office, not after leaving it. That's an important correction to the popular narrative that YouTube fame came first and the business followed. It didn't. The order was steady government job, side work on the weekends, a slowly growing client list, and only much later, a camera. He worked at the Postal Service for roughly 8 years. That's the part most retellings compress into a single sentence. He used to work for USPS, when in reality it was the financial backbone that let him buy his first serious piece of equipment without going into business-crushing debt. The turning point wasn't a viral video. It was a purchase, a used 1965 John Deere dozer, bought with money saved specifically for that purpose. There was no investor, no loan structured around future YouTube revenue. YouTube revenue didn't exist yet in his life, and no shortcut. It was money earned delivering mail, set aside deliberately, spent on a machine old enough that it likely needed almost as much maintenance as it saved him in labor. That single purchase is worth sitting with, because it explains a lot about how Camarata approaches risk even now. He didn't leverage himself to look successful faster. He bought equipment he could actually afford, used it to generate income, and reinvested that income into the next machine. It's a slow compounding model, not a moonshot, closer to how a small contracting business is supposed to grow than how internet fame usually gets described. Camarata Property Maintenance, the company that would eventually become the backbone of both his income and his content, grew out of exactly this pattern. One machine, then property jobs he could take on with it, then enough revenue to justify another machine, then more jobs. There was no single moment of making it. There was a slow accumulation of capacity. Somewhere in the middle of this equipment buying, business building period, Camarata started experimenting with an idea that had nothing to do with looking impressive online, building structures out of shipping containers. At the time he wasn't filming for an audience of any real size. This was a practical decision about materials, not a content strategy. His stated reasoning, echoed across interviews and profiles, was straightforward and unglamorous. Shipping containers are strong, stackable, and already engineered to survive rough conditions, which makes them a genuinely efficient building material for someone who already owns the heavy equipment needed to move and place them. It wasn't a gimmick built for cameras. It was a practical engineering choice made by someone who happened to have a dozer and a crane's worth of curiosity. That distinction is worth making because it undercuts the exposed framing some clickbait content applies to Camarata, the implication that his projects are staged for online appeal. The container work predates his channel's real growth and lines up with how he'd already been solving problems for years, with materials that were affordable, durable, and available, not materials chosen because they'd photograph well. Andrew Camarata's YouTube channel was technically created in 2014, but according to biographical accounts, it sat essentially dormant until February 2016, when he started actually uploading. There's no evidence of a launch plan, a content calendar, or any of the standard playbook moves creators use today. What went up was raw footage of work he was already doing for clients and for himself. The channel's growth was not instant. Reporting on his career notes it took roughly 2.5 years to reach his first 100,000 subscribers, a timeline that looks almost quaint next to today's overnight viral expectations, and one that reinforces the larger pattern of his career: slow, compounding, unglamorous growth rather than a single breakout moment. He crossed 1 million subscribers in September 2021, roughly 5.5 years after his first real upload. By mid-2024, reporting placed his channel at somewhere around 1.3 million subscribers and well over 600 million total views. More recent figures put subscriber counts above 1.5 million. The exact numbers shift depending on when you check, which is normal for any actively growing channel, but the trajectory is consistent. Steady, sustained growth rather than a single viral spike followed by decline. What actually made the videos work is less mysterious than exposed style headlines suggest. There's no trick. The videos are long, largely unedited, and centered on watching a skilled operator solve a real physical problem: clearing land, fixing a broken machine, pouring concrete, building something from scratch. That format has an obvious appeal. It's the opposite of manufactured drama, and audiences fatigued by overproduced content responded to it. Here's where a lot of the online commentary gets sloppy. Camarata's income is frequently described as a YouTube empire, as if the platform is the whole operation. It isn't. Camarata Property Maintenance, LLC continued operating as a real business throughout his channel's growth. He didn't quit contracting work to become a full-time YouTuber in the way that phrase usually implies. Biographical write-ups describe several income streams running in parallel: YouTube advertising revenue, channel memberships and viewer support, merchandise sales, and revenue from the property maintenance and excavation business itself, including client contracting work and his own property development projects. None of these figures are independently audited or officially disclosed. Camarata, like the vast majority of individual creators, has not published exact revenue numbers, so any specific dollar figure attributed to him online should be read as an estimate, not a fact. And the estimates vary widely. Different celebrity net worth sites have put his net worth anywhere from roughly $1.5 million to as high as $6 million, with $3 million appearing as a frequently cited middle estimate. That spread is itself informative. When 4 or 5 outlets covering the same public figure land on numbers 3 to 4 times apart, it's a sign the underlying data is a mix of guesswork, channel analytics estimators, and recycled assumptions rather than verified financial disclosure. None of these figures should be treated as confirmed. What's more reliably documented is the structure of the income, not the total. Camarata has built a setup where the contracting business generates revenue independent of the internet entirely, while the channel generates revenue independent of whether a given week's job sites are quiet. That's a genuinely useful diversification strategy, and it's a big part of why his content has kept a consistent upload rhythm for close to a decade without the burnout arc that ends a lot of creator careers. Because Camarata's channel is so work-focused, viewers have long speculated about his personal life, whether he's married, whether there's a partner who appears off-camera. Multiple biographical sources are consistent on this point. As of their reporting, he is not publicly known to be married, and no confirmed information about a partner has been reported. Family members who have appeared or been referenced in coverage include his parents, described in some profiles as having backgrounds in mechanical and postal work respectively, which lines up with his own account of learning hands-on skills growing up around machinery rather than through formal technical schooling. It's worth being direct about the limits of this information. Personal life details about any private individual, including a public content creator, are the least verifiable part of any profile, and Camarata himself keeps this part of his life largely off-screen. Anything beyond what he's chosen to share publicly would be speculation, and speculation isn't the goal here. If there's a genuine expose buried in Andrew Camarata's story, it isn't scandal. It's the gap between how his success is usually described online and how it actually happened. The popular version skips straight to self-made YouTube millionaire, implying the internet made him. The documented version is slower and less dramatic. 8 years at the post office, money saved deliberately, a used dozer bought outright, a property maintenance business built client by client, and a camera that only showed up after most of the hard, unfilmed work was already done. That sequencing matters because it's the opposite of the advice a lot of aspiring creators get today: build the audience first, then figure out the business. Camarata built the business first, 4 years, with no audience at all, and the audience arrived afterward as a byproduct of him simply continuing to do work he was already doing. It's a far less repeatable formula than most "how I built my empire" content implies, precisely because it depended on a decade of unglamorous, unfilmed labor before anyone was watching. The other thing worth naming plainly: financial claims about Camarata circulating online, specific net worth figures in particular, are not backed by any official disclosure. They're estimates from third-party sites using public subscriber counts, estimated ad rates, and guesswork about business revenue. Presenting any single number as confirmed fact would be inaccurate. The honest version of this story includes that uncertainty rather than papering over it with a clean headline number. It's worth pausing on why the unedited long-form style has held up commercially for close to 10 years, because that longevity is not an accident of taste. It's a format that happens to be cheap to produce and expensive to fake. A heavily scripted, tightly edited channel needs writers, editors, and often a small crew, all of which are costs that scale with output. Camarata's videos, built around a single camera and hours of already happening work, cost almost nothing incremental to produce beyond the labor he was doing anyway. That's not a minor detail. It's the entire reason the model is sustainable rather than a short-term novelty. There's also a retention mechanic built into the format that's easy to miss. Because the videos run long and follow a single job from problem to resolution, viewers who click intend to stay for extended watch times, which is one of the strongest signals YouTube's recommendation system rewards. A slick 3-minute highlight reel might get more clicks per upload. A 40-minute unedited job, watched most of the way through by a smaller but more committed audience, can outperform it on the metrics that actually drive long-term channel growth. None of this requires Camarata to have engineered an algorithm strategy. It's simply what happens when genuinely engaging long-form work meets a recommendation system built to reward watch time. Whether or not that was intentional on his part, it's a defensible, well-documented reason the channel scaled the way it did, rather than evidence of any hidden trick. Early uploads centered narrowly on property maintenance jobs, clearing brush, repairing equipment, running a route much like the rest of his business. Over time, as reported in profiles of his channel, the scope broadened to include larger personal projects, building cabins, constructing a spiral staircase inside one of his structures, expanding the shipping container buildings, and documenting the purchase and repair of additional trucks and machinery. This expansion tracks with a fairly ordinary creator pattern. Audiences who stuck around for the routine work responded even more strongly to bigger, multi-part builds, which naturally pulled more of that kind of content into the rotation. It's a useful corrective to any narrative suggesting Camarata reshaped his actual business to chase content ideas. The order runs the other way. The business kept doing what it already did: property maintenance, excavation, personal building projects, and the channel followed along, occasionally giving him a reason to take on a bigger personal project than a paying client might have asked for, but never replacing the underlying business with content-first decision-making. It's worth walking through, briefly, why the widespread in reported net worth figures exists, because it says something about how creator economy reporting generally works. Sites that publish celebrity or influencer net worth figures typically build their estimates from a small set of public inputs: subscriber counts, estimated views, assumed cost per thousand impression ad rates, which vary enormously by niche and are not public for any individual channel, and rough guesses about business revenue based on industry averages for similarly sized contracting operations. None of these inputs are confirmed by Camarata himself, and none of the outlets citing figures between $1.5 million and $6 million appear to be working from audited financial statements or a direct interview disclosure. That doesn't mean the estimates are worthless. A spread converging loosely around the $2 to $4 million range across multiple independent estimators does suggest a plausible order of magnitude. But it does mean any single figure reported as fact, including the frequently cited $3 million number, should be understood as one estimate among several, not a confirmed valuation. Anyone repeating a specific number as settled fact is going beyond what the public record actually supports. Andrew Camarata's career doesn't have a twist ending, and that's arguably the most interesting thing about it. There's no secret formula, no manufactured viral moment, no financial windfall that really explains the growth. What the record actually shows is a mail carrier who saved money, bought a machine, built a client base, kept working through years nobody was watching, and eventually let a camera capture what he was already doing. The channel grew because the work was real and the pace was sustainable, not because of a trick that got exposed. If there's a lesson in it, it's a fairly unfashionable one. Slow, boring, compounding effort, sustained over roughly a decade, is still one of the more reliable ways to end up somewhere worth being. No hook needed. Biographical and career reporting from the City Celeb, Famous People Today, Biography Tribune, Affair Post, Famous Birthdays, and Celeb Geeks profiles of Andrew Camarata. Andrew Camarata's public statements on The Proper Job podcast, as reported in secondary coverage. A publicly available subscriber and view count data for the Andrew Camarata YouTube channel. Note: individual net worth and income figures for Andrew Camarata are not officially published or independently audited. All financial figures in this script are third-party estimates and are presented as such, not as confirmed fact.